Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whenever it is for you. For me, it is just past midnight on Thursday, October 2nd, 2025, which makes this the news and events for Wednesday, October 1st, 2025, day 1315 of Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. How do you do? I'm Peter Alexievich, and this is the Live at 5 from Kyiv, coming to you from this major European capital currently under siege. And I see the peeps are coming in. Hey, Raven, Roy Daniels. Hey, Derek Sands. Hey, G2, how you doing? Hey, Nicola. Hey, Jeff, how you living, brother? It's harvest time in Oregon, huh, boy? Nice. Hey, bro dog. Hey, Guard. Hey, Carl, how you living? You planting now? Nice. I guess you're indoors, huh, bro? Hey, Feisty. How you doing? Hey, Nick. Hey, Alan. Yep, Raven, you are not wrong. Things are crazy. Winter wheat. It is time to put down the winter wheat and rye. Depending on where you are, of course. Hey, Ireland. How you doing? What's going on, Splendid? Hey, Marius. Marius, thanks for the duet. Marius is always duetting us. We love it. Thanks, pal. Hey, Richard Prexis. How is everybody doing tonight, huh? Well, I cannot tell you what a joy it was to sleep in my own bed last night. It really was. And to be back here in Kyiv. Now, look, Saturday, the Russians slammed the country with 600 drones and 40 missiles, right? And so one of the principal targets on Saturday's attack was Kyiv. Now, bear in mind, it is not by accident that large-scale attack, one of the top 5 largest attacks on Ukraine, came during the UN General Assembly. That was Putin saying to the world, I will do what I want and you can all fuck off. I want to murder this 12-year-old girl in her bed, which happened here in Kyiv on Saturday. I'm going to do it and there is not a goddamn thing you can do to stop it. That was clearly the message on Saturday from the Russians. Hey, Mike Kelly. Hey, Chef Deb. Hey, Cyberdoc. How's everybody doing? Hey, Seawolf. Well, Ozzy, thank you for your service. Hey, Tommy Weber. Hey, Bernard. I'm doing okay. Be careful, Eli. Bjorn, Sweden is in the house. Hey, Bip. Hey, Splendid. Hey, JR. I'm plugging along, pal. I'm plugging along. I want to thank everybody who made the Bulgaria trip possible. It really was an eye-opening and educational experience for me. I really appreciate it. Hey, Scully. Hey, Dawn Patrols. Hey, Hopot. Van, my man, how you living? Oh, well, thanks, Marius. I'd be happy to talk to him. Hey, Clive. So I really was like a sponge all week, just learning, and discovering the limitations of my own knowledge and really how very little I know and how much there is to learn. And so that was great for me, right? So I really appreciate it, everybody. If anybody sees Arna around, Arna is the sponsor of tonight's live. We want to thank him. Tomorrow is Avi, and those guys are the last 2 sponsors of the Bulgaria trip that I want to thank. If anybody wants to sponsor a live, I got no sponsors for next week. I didn't see Arn come in. I know he's out hunting this week. He's up at the cabin chasing moose. So I'm not sure. So Seawolf makes reference to a story I want to talk about, But dude, do me a favor. Let's just hold that thought for a second. And let's take a look at last night's missile and drone attacks. We saw 54 drones fired at Ukraine. 44 of them were intercepted for an 81% interception rate. It is worth pointing out that fully half of them were decoys. Now, we look at what the Russians were able to send this week. 52 one night, 54 one night, 32 one night. Since Saturday, when they sent the 600, they have barely been able to scrape together 50 drones a night to assault the people of Ukraine with. Now, that's good news, I think, in a lot of ways, right? At the current rates of production, assuming that the recent hits against the Tatarstan plant have not slowed production further than we believe, the Russians can only do what they did on Saturday, maybe 10 nights a month. 10 nights a month. No, Western production is outpacing them in every facet of this war. And I'll tell you, Ukrainian production keeps ramping up and coming online, now to the tune of excess capacity, where if the Ukrainians have orders for drones overseas, they can take that money, put it into the economy, and produce those drones. That's good news for everybody. Well, Alex, hang on to that thought, because that is where I want to start. And then I want to talk about the Pusha. Now, look, let's not be alarmist. Let's not get crazy. It's a serious situation, what's unfolding in Zaporizha right now. Now, everybody who follows this channel and everybody who knows the very basic nature of a nuclear reactor, or if you watched Chernobyl, right, which was great. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. You might be right, Pistol Pete, and that is my worry. That's my big fear right there. So we all know that nuclear reactors depend on cooling water flowing through them, keeping those fuel rods cool. This is important because if they're not kept cool, they begin firing neutrons. Those neutrons begin a chain reaction, and you end up with a core meltdown. So especially a reactor that's in a state of cold shutdown, like what we have in Zaporizha, it is critical that the pumps keep pumping, that the cool water continues to flow, keeping their temperature down. Now, the Ukrainians, of course, even with the Novokakhovka ecocide, even with draining the Novokakhovka reservoir, the Ukrainians planned for this, and there is a dedicated cooling pond. So retaining walls were built, the pools were full, the water can be recycled through there and is refilled naturally through rain. And of course, the cooling ponds were unaffected by the Novokakhovka ecocide. So despite the Russians' vast incompetence, careless and egregious recklessness in the prosecution of this war, the Ukrainians had created an environment where the cooling ponds were secure and would always be there regardless of what happened. Good news. Further, the Ukrainians, when they built the goddamn thing, they built it with 3 backups. So the pumps that pump the cooling water are attached primarily to the Zaporizhia power grid, and they take power from the public grid to run the pumps. So in any case, as long as the power is on in Zaporizhia, the pumps work, right? But that's not all they did. They connected the power plant to a second power grid so that if the Zaporizhia power grid failed, it's unlikely that there would be a blackout in both at the same time, right? And you could just fail over to Dnipropetrovsk. But what if both were to fail? What if there was a catastrophic event? Well, then you put some diesel generators in and you keep a bunch of diesel on hand, right? So you got 3 backups. Here's the problem. The Russians want to steal the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant for themselves, and they want to integrate it into the Russian power grid. Well, specifically, they want to integrate it into the Mariupol power grid, which is now integrated into the Russian power grid right at this time. So they begin the process of doing just that, and they disconnect the Zaporizhia. Okay, fine, there's still Dnipropetrovsk, right? Then they shell the lines to Dnipropetrovsk. And so those are cut too. The diesel generators, turn them on. They're turned on. Okay, the pumps are going. Cool water is flowing. IAE, the International Atomic Energy Agency, says that diesel-powered pumps should be run no longer than 72 hours in emergency situations. They are not intended to act, right, Tycho? Exactly, right? 72 hours. They are never intended to be the primary source of power for the pumps with no further backups. At this juncture, the diesel backups have been running for 8 days. So very, very soon, it will be 8 days. It's like 7 days and 16 hours as of right now. That's over twice as long as they're supposed to, max. And we have reports now that one of the generators has failed. We also have a report, and I have to apologize, guys, I'm so sorry. In the video that I did about this, I said that the IAEA said that the Russians only had 2 days worth of diesel on hand. I apologize, I misspoke. According to Carlo Rossi, who's the IAEA Secretary General, right, in charge of the International Atomic Agency, he says that they've got 10 days. Now, the Russians had previously reported that they had over 20 days worth of diesel on hand. That is apparently bullshit. The IAEA is saying that they've got 10 days worth of diesel on hand. Now, let's say, now mind you, this entire time, the whole time, since the first lines were taken offline, so that the Russians could engage in the theft of this Ukrainian property and integrate this reactor into their own power grid. Since that fatal mistake was first made, the Ukrainians have been asking over and over again to let us connect another power grid to the station or repair the lines that have been shelled that go to Dnipropetrovsk. To date, the Russians have flatly refused. So, this is the problem, Pete, right? This is the big problem with the UN. First of all, the goddamn Russians are on the Security Council. They can veto anything they want. That's a problem. The second problem is that the IAEA does not have an enforcement mechanism. They don't have a military that can go in, take control of the plant, and shut it down, or enforce another standard. It doesn't exist. They don't have it. So the question, Pete, what the fuck is the strategy, is exactly the question that we should all be asking. And we should all be asking because, you know, every fucking night on this channel, I say the same thing over and over again, that in the world today, there is only one group of people who are bleeding and dying every day in the cause of democracy, and it's the Ukrainians. And it's the Ukrainians that provide the shield for democracy in Europe. When we look at this situation, where the Ukrainians have said, we are happy to help and fix the fucking problem, and we can't get the Russians to agree, it should be clear to everyone that while Russia is fighting against the whole world, Ukraine is fighting for the whole world. Because this thing, if the worst should happen, it will not be a Ukrainian problem. It will not be a Russian problem. It will be an us problem, an all of us problem, in the same way that Chernobyl was. When we think about Chernobyl, when I think about it, back to it when I was a kid and it happened, I remember dairy farmers in Erie, Pennsylvania, having to throw out milk because the milk showed signs of cesium and strontium-90 in rural Pennsylvania from Chernobyl. Now, guys, we're staring down the face of another Chernobyl right now. That's exactly what this is. Because here's what happens. If those diesel generators run out of fuel in 10 days' time, and no one has reconnected an external power source to run those pumps, the temperature is going to start to rise. Neutrons are going to start to fire. Those neutrons are going to hit the nuclei of other atoms, and we're going to see a chain reaction. And that chain reaction will result in a meltdown of the core, the fuel rods in the core. That event is likely to spark a radiological disaster on par with the Chernobyl disaster. And that should be of concern to all of us. And God knows the Russians are not taking it seriously. Now look, it could just be Russian incompetence, Russian corruption, and Russian avarice at work here. But my great fear is that's not what it is. That what it is an intentional blackmail on the part of the Russians of the rest of the world. Right? What did Putin threaten us with at the start of this war? The 3 Fs. Fission, his nukes. Famine, he would destroy all the food production in Ukraine. And freeze, he would freeze us in our beds by cutting off the fuel to Europe. So far, he has tried to do two of the 3 things. The only thing left is fission. And this may be intentional. Now, to me, it's crazy. Hey, Tim Lilly, how you doing, buddy? Hey, Am Fuller. To me, it's crazy because I know how the fucking jet stream works. I can look at a map of the jet stream right now over the Black Sea, and I can tell you that the wind blows east. Now, curiously enough, guys, because I've been looking at this a lot lately because out of concern for this. About 5 days a month, the jet stream over the Black Sea takes a sharp turn 90 degrees north. It's straight to Moscow. The reality is that this fucking moron, this genocidal lunatic in the Kremlin that Donald Trump worships as his role model, he has as much of a chance of irradiating Moscow or Minsk as he does of irradiating the Ukrainian people. It's insanity. Exactly, Bernard. The Russians are more likely to suffer than any. Well, actually, I take that back. Because if you look, as I understand it, right now I am not a meteorologist, but as an amateur, just looking at the jet stream, where it really goes across the Black Sea is across Krasnodar Krai, across the Caspian, and then into the Central Caucasus and Kazakhstan. And so the folks most likely to suffer include the Armenians, the Azerbaijanis, the Kazakhs, more so than the Russians, actually. Now, again, about 5 days a month, about, 15% of the month, the jet stream takes a hard 90-degree angle, I swear to God, and it goes straight up to Moscow, straight to Moscow. Now, the jet stream is not the only concern here, right? There's higher altitude perturbations in the atmosphere, and that will inevitably drop radioactive particles back onto Europe. Not as much radiation from Chernobyl went west into Europe as went east into Russia, but some of it did. And that's what will happen again. So look, if Rossi over at the International Atomic Energy Agency is correct. We got 10 days before this really becomes a concern, assuming that the generators stay on and the Russians can at least keep them running. But I want to be very clear. Who's the problem, Nicola? Well, Seawolf, I think all Muscovites are mutants, so I don't think it'll make much of a difference. Russia is too powerful. I don't think you know what those words mean, pal. Was that the only one, Nicola? Is there more? Hey, Liam. So, Akron, that is a great question. Hey, Betty Thompson. Well, you know what my opinion on that, Pete, is. Look, at anybody who doesn't think that World War III started on February 24th, 2022 is not fucking paying attention. It may not be like... I mean, look, Mark Galeotti had a great point when he said that what we're living through is the first global conflict of the 21st century. And that's a good way to look at it. Now, in terms of traditional warfare, whose days are over, the Ukrainians have proved that with their incomparable use and innovative use of drones. The reality is that Russia's been fighting a hybrid war against the West for decades. And the West, locked into its traditional notion of kinetic warfare, has failed to take the threat seriously. And in the United States, we failed so badly to take that threat seriously that Russian influence and the corrupting power of Russian disinformation has given us Donald Trump, a Russian asset hell-bent on destroying American power and influence in the world, as well as our economy. So our failure to be aware of what the threat was is as dangerous as our failure when we are aware of the threat and we do nothing, as is happening in Zaporizha right now. Again, when you ask what can we do about it or what can be done, the first thing I want to caution everybody against being alarmist about it or letting it consume you. Right? Having grown up in the Cold War, I was very afraid of nuclear war, and it consumed a lot of my attention. If there's nothing that can be done about this particular situation, let's not let it get under our skin, folks. The powers that be are going to have to decide what to do here. Now, the easiest thing to do would be to let the Ukrainians hook up the goddamn lines. That would be so easy to do. We just need somebody reasonable to make that happen. A less reasonable thing, but still a solution, at least in the short term, would be for the goddamn Russians to get off their ass, take responsibility for what's theirs, because it's under their management right now, and get it hooked up to the Melitopol power grid and restore that secondary source of power. At the very least, the Russians could do that. And they've got 10 days to do it. And that's an easy fix. That's just running cable, baby. Running cable and snipping ends. No problem. So let's all just hope for the best here, right? We've had a couple close calls with Zaporizha before. Thank God any serious radiological incidences have been avoided. Let's hope that that's going to be the case. Because there is not a goddamn thing anybody on this stream can do to affect the outcome, I'm afraid to say. For all the reasons we've already specified. Somebody had said about hoarding iodine pills. Guys, look, everybody should have some iodine pills in their cabinets. That's just a thing. Now, if you don't have them, I suggest you get some. But I don't suggest you get them, as I understand it, if you are a man over 30. The only people that iodine therapy and radiological events has benefits for as prophylaxis are people under 30, particularly children and pregnant mothers. That's who should have those pills in their cabinets. I don't need them. It's not going to do a goddamn thing for me. And neither do most of you, because most of you are like me. So Akron, what can be done? I'm afraid very little. The Russians have to do, the Russians are the ones with the guns. They're the ones in control of this facility. Under every international convention, it is their responsibility. I can't even say that if they fail in this responsibility and we have a major radiological event, that the world is strong enough to hold them culpable for it. I can't even say that, because so far we've done very little to hold them accountable. So we'll have to wait and see. And if you are a pregnant woman, if you are a person under the age of 30, I do suggest that you have on hand, just as a matter of course, not because of this in particular. If you live in the United States, if you live within 50-mile radius of a nuclear site, nuclear reactor, your local government will provide iodine tablets for you. Easy peasy. Go get them. Make sure they're in your cabinet. Make sure they're not expired. Not in our lifetimes, those rods aren't going to be cool enough for anything else, that's for sure. Oh, yeah, Anthony, we're done. Come on. Our lives are over. Tommy Weber, you know what I always say, pal. I'm not leaving this country before the Russians do. I am not leaving this country until we have roasted a pig on a Crimean beach. And you are all invited. Hey, Sam, so how you living, brother? Okay. So that's the first big thing I want to talk about tonight is Zaporizha. Everybody take a deep breath. Let's be sensible about it, and let's keep our eyes on it. Now, the next thing is the Pushpa. Pushpa? I think it's the Pushpa. Pushpa. The Pushpa and the Sea Maverick. So, we saw drones, Jesus Christ, in the last 15 days now. We've had drone incursions, Russian drone incursions in Romania, Poland, we believe Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. Then you got the manned aircraft incursions into Estonian airspace by the Russians, right? Now, the latest drone incursion into Denmark was somewhat different. The drone incursion that closed the airport in Copenhagen, as well as one military airfield and two other civilian airfields in Denmark last Thursday night into Friday morning, was different. The drones appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Danish early warning radar did not detect them. They did not detect them until they were over Danish or in Danish airspace. And then they disappeared off of radar. Just disappeared. Nobody knew what happened to them. They were gone. Very unusual. So people like Dominic Nichols and other people in the open source intelligence community immediately started looking for transponder signals from ships at sea. Could these drones have been launched from a cargo ship or a tanker being used as a drone platform? And sure enough, two Russian tankers belonging to the Shadow Fleet, the Pushpa and the Sea Maverick, were identified. And when we look at their routes on maritime trackers, They are not direct in any way. They are circuitous. They are going in circles. They're just meandering about the fjords. Why? So immediately, these two Russian vessels of the Shadow Fleet, both of which are sanctioned, came under immediate scrutiny, but were able to leave the area. Well, the French found one of them. The French seized the Pushpa just outside Biscay Bay, which is off the south central coast, the south central Atlantic coast of France. And that's where it's currently undergoing inspection. What we expect to find, or what we're hoping to find, is some evidence that aerial drones were launched from this vessel at sea, or that the vessel is equipped with drone launching devices or mechanisms. Now, we don't yet have that intelligence assessment, but we are hoping to get that in the near term. And if, in fact, it turns out that the Russians are now, look, we've already seen the Russians use tankers to cut undersea cables. That's a thing. This is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about being in a hybrid war with Russia. Russia is at war with the entire West. And the fact that that war takes the form of disruptions of airspace, incursions into sovereign airspace, disruptions of civilian airline traffic. I've flown through Copenhagen. My day could have been disrupted. That pisses me off every time. And that's what they did. The Danes are taking this threat so seriously that they are now calling up their reservists. I don't know exactly what they're planning on doing, but they are currently activating reservists in Denmark. So the official word came out from the Minister of Defense that Danish reservists would be receiving orders to report and that they should report immediately as per the orders they receive. We are, Raven, we are in a de facto state of war with the Russians. The Russians are always in a state of war. We just haven't noticed it. And that's a fucking problem, because it emboldens the Russians to think that we're afraid, that we're intimidated. And the reality is that the average person in the West never thinks of Russia, never thinks of them at all, and chalks these kinds of hybrid events up to nuisances at best, like the buzzing of a gnat or a fly. Not important. And I'll tell you something, that makes the Russians crazy if you think they're not important. And they're not. And they're taking it out on the Ukrainians badly. Oh, on that subject, that's 600. That's what I meant to say before when I was talking about Saturday night's missile and drone attack on Kyiv. They hit power infrastructure. Of course they did. It's getting cold. Winter is coming. You want to freeze Ukrainian grandmothers in their beds because that's how you fight your fucking war, you worthless terrorist cowards. So they hit energy infrastructure here. The lights keep going off. I just want you to know the modem is plugged into the backup power. I got candles lit, so the live will continue unabated. The Ukrainians, for their part, are not taking anything sitting down, boy. They hit the Yaroslav oil refinery yesterday, the fifth largest in Russia. That processes 15.7 million barrels of crude, million tons of crude oil a year. That's roughly almost 5%, say, of the total refining capacity of Russia. Now, some of the Ukrainian propaganda channels are saying that Russian refining capacity is down 40%. I don't have good evidence that that's true, but you may see that claim out there. The consensus evidence, or the consensus is that 21%, 1 in 5 liters of gasoline that Russia needs to run its economy and its daily life is not being produced today. 21%, that's a big deal. Now, this hit against Yaroslav may well reduce that further, even by a percentage point. But the idea that 40% is offline is nonsense. Guys, look, these drones are small. The damage they can do is small. Repairs are being affected to these refineries. Production is being restored. As much as I don't want to say that's the case, it is the case. In this instance, drones hit the VT6 unit, which is one of the critical units of the distillation process. The problem is Yaroslavl's got 2 other distillation towers. So at the most, we're talking about maybe an additional 1% of Russian refining capability will be offline here. They did hit Yaroslavl, which by the way, Jeff, right, is 700 kilometers inside Russia. That's like what, 480 miles. It's a good hit. It's the first time Yaroslavl has been hit in this war. Shit. I think I forgot to write that down. I meant to write that down and I didn't. The Ukrainians assassinated 2 war criminals of the Russian Federation this weekend. One was in the occupied territories, and I forget the details of who he was. But the other one was a senior officer in the Russian National Guard, and he was eliminated in Russia's Stavropol Krai, about 400 kilometers southeast of the Kerch Bridge. According to the GUR, or the HUR, the HUR, the main intelligence directorate of Ukraine, main military intelligence directorate of Ukraine, the elimination of this senior lieutenant colonel was done in cooperation with somebody I've never heard of before, the Caucasus Liberation Movement. The Caucasus Liberation Movement. Now, we often talk about the sacrifices and the tremendous work of partisans working behind the lines. Can you imagine having to live your whole life showing one face to the world, the Russian occupiers who maybe you have to work with every day, while in the background you are working for their downfall every day? Every day you risk your life to get critical intelligence to the Ukrainian armed forces so that all these strikes we talk about on here are successful, that they hit the target. Can you imagine having to live your life, that double life, knowing that during the day you're serving food to Russian officers in the mess hall, and at night you're burning railway cabinets? Because that's the life these guys are living. And nobody deserves our respect as much as the guys behind the lines risking their lives. Now, I want to point out that, Atesh has been making a lot of noise lately, that they're doing all this recruiting, and that more and more Russians are turning against the government inside Russia. And that may be true. But I think that it's important to note, too, that when the end comes, when the collapse of the inevitable collapse of the Russian Federation begins, what takes its place is being formed right now, specifically by the League of Free Nations. The League of Free Nations represents 15 ethnic minorities and nationalities inside of the former Russian Empire. Conquered peoples, the people of Sakha, right? The Komi people, the Tuvans, the folks in Kamchatka, the Bashkirs. All these different folks who were conquered and enslaved by Moscow and the Muscovites in the 18th and 19th centuries, but who have maintained their cultural identity, their cultural uniqueness. Well, the League of Free Nations is active. Dagestan is not a member of the League of Free Nations, but the Dagestanis are a great example of another group, Matthew, that has maintained their cultural identity as separate, despite all the efforts to Russify them. And certainly the traditional ethnic conflicts between the Dagestanis and the Chechens, when Putin is gone, when the economy has collapsed, and the Russian Federation descends into the orgy of violence that it undoubtedly will, the Dagestanis and the Chechens are going to be at each other's throats. Unless right? Because first you got the 15 members of the League of Free Nations. Then you have all these other guys like the Chechens, the Dagestanis, the Tuvans, who aren't in that, but who are of the same cut of cloth. They have the same history with the Russians. Now, right now in this country, in Ukraine, as part of the International Legion, there's an entire Chechen brigade. These guys are opposed to Kadyrov and to the Kadyrov. They want to see a free Chechnya, and they are fighting on behalf of Ukraine against the Russian threat. When this war is over, where do you think they're going to go? Like their Belarusian brothers, they're going to go home to free their people. With the traditional animosity between the Dagestanis and the Chechens, there's every reason to believe that the Dagestanis might work with these guys to bring down the current Chechen regime. What about Yakutia? The Yakuts, that's another group. I don't know if they're in the league or not, Texan. I'd have to take a look. Or, pal, if you got a computer handy, just go to Wikipedia, League of Free Nations. The list, or just do a search for League of Free Nations and go to the website. You got to translate it from the Russian, of course, the colonizers' language. But I think the Yakutia might just be involved there. The Sakha definitely are. Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. Now, okay, so where was I? So the League of Free Nations. The Secretary General, a guy named Dagmar DuPont, has just said that while we may not know the exact time, the collapse of the Russian Federation is coming, and it is no longer beyond the mountains, which I take to be a poetic way of saying it's now in sight. It's no longer invisible, somewhere in the future. Thanks, Scully. The Yakuts are. Yakuts are in the League of Free Nations. Makes perfect sense. These guys are getting ready. They see the collapse is coming and that the power vacuum is going to open. Now, look, I'm not saying that this is not without concerns and risks. Because the populations of these groups are so sparse, right? If you take all the non-Russian ethnic minorities in Russia, you maybe have 35 million people. That means that there's 4 to 1 ethnic Russians for every one that's a non-Russian. The big concern about the Yakuts, the Tuvans, the Bashkirs, the folks in Kamchatka, these guys, the big concern there is that they're going to turn to Russia for protection. In the same way that when the Soviet Union fell, all of the former Soviet republics in Europe, the Baltic states, the former Warsaw Pact nations, all sought refuge in NATO. In the Far East, it's likely that they'll seek security guarantees from China. And that's a concern, which is why, in my opinion, the CIA should be on the ground arming these guys right now. But that's not happening, not at all, because America has been subverted by a malign foreign power. That's the reality. Now, as far as armed insurrection groups inside of Russia, we know of at least 6 of these nationalistic ethnic minorities that are armed and are preparing revolution against the Kremlin. They include folks like the Chechens. There's an entire armed resistance of Chechens. And they're going to cause problems for this regime when Kadyrov dies, as he inevitably will, one way or another. The Tuvans, the Bashkirs, etc. There's at least a half a dozen of these groups, and they are longing for the day that they can shake off the yoke of Russian oppression. And that day is coming. That day is coming. I did seem to get, I don't know, I did kind of get something wrong. I thought that conscription had become an annualized event. That is to say that it is always ongoing. I appear to have been mistaken about that because Putin just signed the autumn conscription order to call up 135,000 Russians for their mandatory year of service. Now, it is important to point out, right, just to point out that this is what the official Russian line is. According to Vice Admiral Vladimir Zimlarsky, who is the Deputy Director of Recruitment for the Russian Federation, he says that it is not related to the SMO, this calling up of a record 135,000. He went on to say that Russian law prohibits the use of conscripts in combat, as indeed it does. However, what are conscripts commonly used for? Commonly used for border patrol and border operations. Well, that caused a great deal of discontent inside Mother Russia during the Kursk incursion, when these very conscripts who were on guard duty at the border became frontline troops in Russia's war of aggression against the people of Ukraine. The ISW cites Russian discontent over this. Now, it is important to recognize that by all accounts, folks drafted or conscripted in this fashion are often pressured into taking full military contracts and being involved in the SMO. In terms of numbers, this 135,000 for the autumn conscription run brings the total between the two conscription cycles of the year. In spring, 160,000, and in autumn now, 135,000, for a total of 295,000 new conscripts. That's up 16% from 2022, where the total was 254,000, or 2023, where it was 277,000, or 2024, where it was 283,000. About 5% a year, 16% since 2022. But don't worry, Vice Admiral Zimlarsky, Vice Admiral Zimlarsky assures us these increasing numbers have nothing to do with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Okay, guys, it's just about 8 minutes to the top of the hour. Again, I want to thank Arn, who is the sponsor of this live, and everybody that made Bulgaria possible. Thanks so much, everybody. And I want to thank Lars, who has the Discord server, Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces, and of course, the moderator team, best moderators on the Tickety Talk, Jay, Travis, Pete, Maddie, and Feisty. Thank you all so much. Okay, so guys, we got about 7 minutes left. Questions, comments, points of observation, insults, anything? Hey, Paw Prince. Hey, Ben Tilly. Hey, Chrissy Locks. Hey, George. Oh, Guy, on the subject of that Turkish truck driver. So, on Saturday night's big overnight missile and drone attack, one of the fatalities, one of the casualties was Turkish truck driver, father of 3 little girls, who had just unloaded a bunch of generators here in Kyiv. And when the air raid started, he did not go to the shelter. And he was hit by a Russian drone and unalived on the spot. Now, we haven't heard. Thanks, Dawn Patrols. Thanks a lot. That's very, very helpful to me. So the poor guy was unalived on the spot. We haven't heard any official word from Ankara on this. I think maybe part of it is because Erdogan was in Washington this week, right? Everybody knows that back in 2018, when Turkey, a NATO member, decided to buy S-400 missile systems from the goddamn Russians, that they got kicked out of the F-35 program, which they did not. Oh, nice, Pete. I wondered. That's awesome, dude. Thank you. I really like that. Thank you. Thank you very much. So back in 2018, they got kicked out of the F-35 program for buying Russian S-400 systems. Now, 7 years later, they're suffering buyer's remorse, right? The systems are super expensive to maintain. They got kicked out of the F-35 program and sanctioned by the U.S. And on top of it now, Russia wants to buy them back, which is really funny to me. But of course, they can't sell them to them because, they would be used to kill Ukrainians, yada, yada. So, he had a meeting. Erdogan had a meeting with Trump, and Trump intimated that, in fact, they would be getting back in the F-35 program. Now, it's not definite yet. They did a kind of trade agreement. Turkish Airlines is going to buy, I forget. I want to say like 50 Dreamliners and then 135 Max jets, something like that, like a big order for Boeing. $100 billion in trade, something like that. And then they also agreed on nuclear cooperation, which is just a rehash of our present international agreements, but Trump got to put his name on it. What else? Those were the highlights of the meeting. Those are the things that came out of it for sure. And maybe they're going to get back in the F-35 program. Heroam Slava. Why can't I scroll this stupid thing? Here we go. Oh, brother. Avi, you're in on this too? Truth hurts. Last week was very educational. Very educational. Learned a lot of things. Whole different way of looking at the world. Now, I'm hoping I can translate that. So, guys, on Saturday at 7 o'clock, we have our next Laughter is the Best Medicine show. I'll live stream it like we always do. And for Act 2, I'm going to try to implement some of the things I learned last week so you can decide for yourself whether or not I got anything out of it. So that'll be live streaming on Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern European time. That's 5 p.m. London. New York, it's noon. LA, it's 9 a.m. This Saturday, October 4th. Oh, the Arne-E, the big E. Believe me, Arne and I have discussed many times how poor my American pronunciation is. And I have him on video telling me how to pronounce his name. I swear to God, this is true. I have a video of Arne telling me how to pronounce his name, and I practice with it, and I'm still not good at it. I'm still not good at it. So you're pointing it out is great for my ego. Thanks so much. Hey, J-Boy. Thanks, Akron. Well, of all the royals, I have to say Princess Anne is probably my favorite. Pistol Pete, I don't know. I would not presume to predict what the straw that will break the camel's back of the Russian people is. I just don't know. Something like what we're talking about with Zaporizha may, in fact, have the opposite effect on the Russians. It may unite them against their common enemy, the whole world. And they will blame Ukraine and the world for the disaster, and all the ill that they suffer because of it, taking no responsibility for themselves, nor projecting any responsibility nor accountability on the Kremlin, which is where the entire responsibility lies. So I don't know. Why weren't those drones just shot down in NATO space? It's a great question. I mean, I don't know the real answer, right? I'm not privy to those kinds of conversations. But it does seem to me that the biggest reason is that the West is not prepared to shoot them down. They look at what they, now look, I'm not criticizing. What we saw in response to the Polish drone incursion was a coordinated, multinational response that included Polish F-16s, Dutch F-35s, Italian AWACS, and a NATO refueling jet out of Estonia, all of which worked together to do a threat assessment and to shoot down some of the threat. It's pretty comprehensive. I know I'm just an amateur, right? I'm not a military person. But as an amateur looking at it, it seems like a pretty good response. And I know NATO has gotten lots of criticism about it from other folks, but not me. I think that's doing the best you can do, mobilizing all your assets. The problem, Kennedy, is that those are all the assets that we have. And those aren't the assets you need to deal with these drones. You know, a $20,000 Gerbera decoy, and you're firing a $400,000 air-launched missile from an F-16? That doesn't make any sense. That's not a cost-effective nor proportionate response. And so I think once they recognize that the threat, I think that's why only 4 of 24 were shot down. Because I think once they recognized that the threat was not a real threat, that it was foam, rubber, and plywood, a decoy Gerbera, there was no reason to spend the money, right? No reason at all. And why so many people in NATO refused to call it an attack, insisting that it was merely a provocation. So I think that's why they weren't shot down. It's too expensive to. And that's why the drone wall that the EU and NATO are talking about is so important. A cost-effective system to deal with Russian drone incursions along NATO's and Europe's eastern flank. Now, in point of fact, some Ukrainian military specialists in these drone operations just arrived in Poland to help train the Poles on how to deal with it. You know, for years and years, Ukraine's been asking Europe to help with their skies, and Europe hasn't done a goddamn thing about that. And yet the very first time that European airspace is incurred, the Ukrainians send help. I think everybody ought to pay attention to that reality. Russia occupies 19.2% of Ukraine, and how they're going to push the Russians out of there is very difficult to say. In fact, most military analysts seem to think that they can't. And so it comes down to not the Russians being pushed out, but the Russians being forced to withdraw because they're not being fed, not getting ammunition, right? They cannot keep up the battle. All right, kids, it's about 1:04 here in the morning. I got started about 4 minutes late, so I'm going to call it a night. Big thanks again to Arne, who is the sponsor of tonight's live. If anybody wants to sponsor live, PayPal's in the description. Thanks to Lars, who has the Discord server, Nightshade, who has the Peter's Peeps group on the Book of Faces, and of course to the best moderator team on the Tickety Talk. Thanks, everybody. Guys, I'm sorry. I was traveling last week, so the lives were not reposted to YouTube because I didn't have a computer to download them to. I downloaded them all today, reposted them all to YouTube. So for anybody who missed any of last week's lives and wants to catch up, they are all now on the Tuba U's, along with my walking tours of Sofia, Bulgaria, which was a real joy, a real joy. Lives are Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Night, Paul. And next live is tomorrow. Thanks, Coffin. Night, Chrissy Locke. Good night, Paul. Night, Gary. Night, Pete. Pete, that was funny, the bastard thing. That was funny, dude. I appreciate that. Thank you. You too, Anthony. Take care. Night, George. See you, T-Bone. Night, Feisty. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate you. Night, David Keller. Night, Truthful. Me too, Guard. I don't think they have it in them. James, where are you at in PA? Night, Jeff. Night, G2. Night, Bip. Van. Take care, brother. Night, Carla. I guess James is gone already, huh? All right, I'm calling it a night. Night, Mike Kelly. Take care, everybody.